Good morning. Jenny and I are going to be on vacation the next 2 weeks, so I'm recording these two sessions at home in my office so that you'll have this commentary as we continue to look at old things in a new way. This morning, we turn to the story of Jacob and Esau, um, where Jacob tricks Esau into giving up his birthright. Just a little background, go back and set the stage. Abraham and Sarah had begun the genealogy here that leads to this story. And as we're dealing with birthright, which comes from the firstborn, there's another interesting story that you might want to go back and look at, and that Abraham and Sarah, Abraham's firstborn was Ishmael, who was born through Abraham's relationship with Sarah's slave that Sarah arranged for. And Ishmael eventually gets ostracized from the camp because Sarah gets jealous over this. Their sons, later sons, Isaac comes along, and Isaac marries Rebekah. Abraham sends Isaac off so that he'll be with some of their kinfolk to find a wife. And you have another story there of Isaac and the trickery with Rebekah's father in getting Isaac to work longer to get what he was promised. And to Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Esau were born. They're twins. Esau was the firstborn. And it says that as he was born, that Jacob had a hold of his heel as he was being born. And it also describes Esau as red, hairy individual, meaning he had red hair, and he had hair over a large portion of his body, in contrast to Jacob, who probably had the more common features of dark hair and dark complexion. It's worth noting here that David is also described in a way that would indicate a red-headed individual. So redheads were not uncommon. Maybe they were uncommon, but not an exception, so to speak. So Esau is born first, and he has some rights as a result of that. Under Jewish law, the firstborn gets a double portion of the estate. The estate is divided up into equal portions, and then the firstborn gets two portions, and the rest of the descendants, the other male heirs, get one portion each. And as Esau has been out hunting, Esau is portrayed as an outdoorsman. He is more closely aligned with Isaac, and Jacob is more closely aligned with his mother Rebekah, and their relationship with their parents. And Esau spends his time out hunting. He's an outdoorsman, and he also, in his travels around being an outdoorsman, he has taken on some wives who are outside of the Jewish, the Hebrew line from Edom. And so Esau is related to Edom and the Edomites. One of the things I found in the commentary I thought was interesting is that there is, under the Jewish tradition, the rabbis that gather and decipher these things had decided that Rome, and then more broadly all of Europe, are descendants of Esau. Now, that's not historical, and it's not a historical question that you should ask of the scripture, but I just thought that was interesting that they gave that lineage to them. But the Edomites were enemies of the Israelites. And Esau has taken some of their women as his wives. He returns home, and Jacob is cooking a meal, making a stew, a lentil stew, it's described. And Jacob sees an opportunity here because Esau comes in and said he wants some food. And we don't know the background of why Jacob chose this time. It's just the way the scripture recorded it, that he came in and wanted to get something to eat. And Jacob decides he's going to get something for this. And he says, okay, if you want some of my stew, you have to give me your birthright. And Esau says, what does that matter to me? I'm going to die. We're all going to die at some point. I'm hungry. I need something to eat right now. So yeah, you can have it. And so thus the birthright transfers to Jacob. And as I said, the birthright is that that double portion of the inheritance, but also it was associated with God's law. And so Esau is in effect also saying, in giving up his birthright, that it's not important to him, is that God's not important to him. And we'll see that Jacob does have a relationship with God. We don't know anything about any relationship that Esau ever has with God. But in this passing of his birthright, it seems that he does not care anything about God or have any kind of a relationship. And so the birthright is related to the spiritual direction, spiritual relationships, in addition to the inheritance. And the blessing is material, political power, if you will. I think is a better way of putting it. And that's all that our story deals with here in the scripture that we have for this Sunday. But as the story unfolds, Jacob flees because he goes on to further trick Jacob into giving his blessing as he's dying to Isaac, giving his blessing to Jacob. I believe I misstated that. Thinking that he was giving it to Esau as he's dying. With his mother's help, they tricked Isaac into believing that it's Esau. And after this trickery has been done, Jacob flees, ironically, back to the same area that Isaac was sent to get a wife. And as the story goes on, Jacob prospers and he decides he needs to make things right with his brother. And he comes back, and as he gets closer, he gets more and more antsy about how his brother's going to receive him. And he keeps sending things on in front of him, and finally sends all of his family. And it's kind of cold and calculating here, as Jacob seems to be all along, in that if his family is destroyed, that he'll still be safe. He stays back. And if Esau's got some wrath, he sends his family in front of him. Not very manly of him, but that's the way the story unfolds. Esau, at this point, just wants to be reunited with his brother. Jacob wants to give him what he tricked his birthright and the blessing. He wants to give that back to Esau. Esau doesn't care anything about that, even now. He just wants to be with his brother. And that's the way the story unfolds there. But we're looking specifically here at Jacob's actions in tricking Esau into giving up his birthright. And since this is related to the spirituality, um, Esau is also giving up on God, saying that God's not important to him. And I think that that's something we could spend some time looking at and thinking about as we contemplate what the story says to us and how Pastor Dawn might unpack this for us in our worship later on this morning. So may God's blessings be upon you, and we'll be back again next week as we look at the story of Samson.